And I know there are other folks here from the Historical Society, so maybe you can introduce some of those folks. And I just met Joan Roberts, who goes way back in the history of Sunny Slope. She started the Sunny Slope Alliance many, many, many years ago. So there's been a long history of community activism in Sunny Slope and a long history of library service. So, Ed?
Okay, good. To start with the Sunny Slope Historical Society, we'll be celebrating soon the 30th year of the society. And our president is Renee Blaine, very dynamic. We have our key members here, Dave Smith and Jeff down there. Everybody else?
And Dorothy.
And Dorothy.
Oh,
And
Joan.
Roberts, of course. Yes, yes. Our neighbor, Joan Roberts, who lives right down the street from us, right over there. Hello. Okay. Well, the beginnings of the forerunner to the Acacia Library can be traced to a luncheon meeting that occurred 90 years ago on January 22nd, 1929, at a luncheon meeting. And at that meeting, Reverend Joseph Hillhouse, who was the director of the Desert Mission, gave a presentation to a service group known as the Knights of the Round Table. Reverend Hillhouse explained to the Knights that the purpose of the Desert Mission was to provide help for the many people who were living on the desert, who were sick with tuberculosis and other lung diseases, and there were not a lot of other services in the area. The mission provided a little bit of medical help, but it was not a sanatorium. It was a place where people could come to for activities to get their mind off of their illness and so on. And it had many social services for it. And he explained to the Knights that the first thing he wanted to do, the mission was pretty new at this point. It started in late 27, this was early 29, so just been around for about a year. He said one of the first things he wanted to do was to provide a library, because that most people could read and would give them time to read, which would occupy their time, and also give them a place to gather at and meet other people and so on. And he said, and he knew exactly where a library could go, because it just so happened that adjacent to the chapel at the mission, which was the only building that had been built to that point, there was a parcel of land with a building on it that was for sale. It was a small building, but still he thought it would do for a starter for a library. So Reverend Hillhouse was apparently very convincing, and by the end of the luncheon, the Knights of the Round Table passed a hat, and came up with the $450 that was necessary to buy the land and the building. So the new Knights of the Round Table Library was dedicated in May of 1929, and it contained about 1,300 books, all of which were donated, as were the shelving and the furniture and everything else. Also, the original building was very small, less than 1,000 square feet, and they also received donations to extend the building just a little bit, 2 extra rooms in there, but it still was a fairly small place at 1,000 square feet or so. By the mid-1930s, the number of volumes at the library, the number of books had reached about 3,000. And the policy of the library for loaning books was that you could take the book and bring it back whenever you were ready to bring it back. You didn't have to, it wasn't 2 weeks or a month or whatever. When you were done with it, go ahead and bring it back. They were even more lenient on their policy for loaning magazines. The magazine, you could take out a magazine, and if you wanted to bring it back, that was fine. If you didn't want to, go ahead and keep it. That's how they did it. They had other services available at the library. One of them was there was a radio. Many of the people around did not either have a radio or access to it, and you could come to the library to listen to a radio. They also had a telephone, and there were you could use the phone for free. And they also had a listing of part-time, short-term jobs which were available in the area. The thing about tuberculosis, for many people, that you feel good some days and not others. That's a long-term, ongoing thing. But if you felt good, you were capable of working for a day, and you wanted to find a place, then the library would go to have the list of that. For people who were too ill to come into the library, many people who were bedridden had to very carefully watch their diet and watch their weight and so on. So they needed to weigh themselves. And the library had bathroom scales for loan, that someone could come down and pick up a bathroom scale, bring it back to the person, weigh them, and bring it back to the library. In 1942, there was a fire at the Desert Mission, which destroyed about two-thirds of the mission. At this time, the mission had 9 buildings, and it was located on Eva Street, which is just about a block north of Dunlap. It was located between 3rd Street and 5th Street. Now, the distance between there is about 275 feet from west to east. And it's just the whole area encompassed 1 acre. So the fire wiped out the whole east, central, and eastern portion of the campus, which left the library here. The library was untouched. There was no problem with the library at all. And next to it was what's called the Wrigley Community Center, which was a much larger building than the library, was built in 1930. So as they reorganized, they wanted to reorganize the layout of the campus so they could use all that burned area, and they decided to move the Knights of the Round Table Library. So they physically up and lifted the building and all the books, which was about 6,000 books at that time, and moved it over to the east edge of the library at 5th Street, which is a distance of about 200 feet. After World War II, of course, the post-war, there was quite a boom in town everywhere around. So there were many more needs for the library, and it needed to be expanded. So they decided to move the library back to the west edge of the mission, utilizing that large building, which was also not touched by the fire. And that building was about 2,000 square feet, so much larger than what they had been operating in for 24 years, about 24 years already. At that time, when they moved to the larger building, they had about 9,000 books. And it was said that library was the only free loan library within about a 10-mile radius. 12 months prior to when they moved the library, they said that about 7,000 readers took advantage of the library and withdrew about 17,000 books. They also had many. They had started a program for adult education in foreign languages and music and various topics, and moving to the larger space also gave the adult education program more room to move. A year later, in 1954, the Desert Mission Library turned over the reins, the administration of the library, to Maricopa County, and it became part of the Maricopa County library system. And the reason for this is that the Desert Mission kind of changed its purpose a little bit. Where it had started as a social service organization for the ill on the desert, there was no longer as great of a need for that. Penicillin had been developed during the war, became popular after the war, so there were not as many people out there that really needed that. But what they did need were other medical services. And the Desert Mission became split into 2 different fronts. On the one half, it pursued medical campus, which eventually became John C. Lincoln. Then the other half pursued more welfare-oriented services, basic food and clothing and housing, which is still known as the Desert Mission. So the Desert Mission branch of the Maricopa County Library existed for about 5 years, until 1959, when this area was annexed by the city of Phoenix. And the Desert Mission Library of the county library system became the Desert Mission Library of the city of Phoenix library system. And it existed as part of the city of Phoenix library system for about 10 years, until 1969, when the library, which had started 40 years earlier, in 1929, with a $450 donation, was replaced by the Acacia branch of the Phoenix Public Library. Thank you.
Oh, if we could only buy a piece of land to build a library for $450 today, that would be awesome. We could take over. So, thank you so very much, Ed. That was a great story. I really loved hearing that. It's nice to know that the history of library service goes that far back in this community. And that I was curious to hear about the part about the Maricopa County Library District taking over. library service here.